When I discovered my husband's affair, I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I chose silence, living as if there had never been a crack, until the day both his mistress and I were pregnant. His face froze when I handed the envelope. Alexander Thorne, my husband, walked into the apartment at dawn, his suit still crisp, tie pulled tight as if he had just left an important meeting. The cool scent of body wash lingered around him, as though he had tried to scrub something away. "Honey, why are you still up?" he asked, his voice light, but his damp hands grabbed mine, squeezing harder than needed. "Didn't I say I had a meeting? You didn't have to wait?" A meeting? Who needs a shower after a meeting? I pulled my hand back slowly and pushed the pregnancy test result across the table. "I'm pregnant, 12 weeks. The air froze instantly. Alexander stiffened, his pupils contracting. The apartment fell silent, only the ticking of the wall clock breaking through, each beat counting the tension. The dim glow of the desk lamp fell across his face, sharpening his features, but twisting them out of shape. I sat on the sofa, my hand resting lightly on the paper, fingertips brushing the thin edge, the roughness faint against my skin. He stood there, just a few steps away, yet the distance between us had never felt wider. I slid the paper toward him, deliberate, unhurried. "I'm pregnant, 12 weeks," I repeated, my voice calm, but each word carving into the air. He dropped onto the sofa, the leather groaning under his sudden weight. His hand trembled as it brushed along the edge of the table, as if he wanted to touch the paper but couldn't. "Get rid of it," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, yet I caught every word. "I can look the other way." What kind of man can overlook his wife's infidelity? Unless he had been the one unfaithful first. I looked straight into his eyes, steady, unblinking, without flinching. "The baby is yours." Alexander jerked his head up, his eyes darkening, the corner of his mouth curling into a cold smile, as if he was trying to mask the storm inside with a frozen shell. His voice rang out. "For the past 2 years, every time you forced me to use protection, and besides, we haven't slept together for half a year. Now you say the baby is mine? Violet Clark? Do you think I'm that easy to fool?" I looked at him, unblinking, and slowly replied, "Believe it or not, that's up to you." My voice was steady, no highs, no tremors. I sat upright, moving slowly, deliberately, my hand resting gently on my belly. I felt the warmth spread beneath my palm, and in that moment, I knew he was staring at me. Alexander's expression froze instantly, as if caught in mid-ice. His eyes widened, and I saw emotions swirling. Shock, confusion, and somewhere within, a faint glimmer of joy. He stammered, his voice hoarse. "When did—" The words broke apart, as if he couldn't bear to finish the question. I kept my tone calm, as if I were telling a story that had nothing to do with me. "Sophia Lynn is 5 weeks pregnant. The time you went with her to the hospital for a checkup." Alexander's face turned visibly pale, as though all the blood had drained away, leaving only a ghostly, lifeless white. His lips trembled, his fingers clenched the sofa armrest so tight his nails dug into the leather, and I could hear the faint, sharp scrape. How do you know?" His voice was so low, it was almost a whisper, like a forced confession echoing through the quiet room. I didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel its weight. Alexander yanked off his suit jacket, the movement rough, like he was trying to rip off his last layer of armor, then tore at his tie and flung it aside. He lit a cigarette, his hands shaking so badly the lighter's flame flickered, unstable, illuminating the beads of cold sweat across his forehead. He exhaled a ring of smoke, his voice hoarse, choked by the haze. "No wonder." The smoke curled through the air, its acrid stench thickening the suffocating room. He lifted his head to look at me, his eyes flashing with the wary alertness of a wounded animal, ready to bite back. You suddenly started insisting I use protection. You knew from then. Why didn't you say anything? You endured 2 years. Why not keep enduring? I gently caressed the small swell of my belly, feeling the fragile life growing inside. For the first time that night, my voice wavered, a faint tremor slipping through. I was waiting for you to tire of her, to come back to your family. For the first time, my tone faltered. But what I got instead was her pregnancy. So I thought, it's time to leave. The sound of the cigarette being crushed out in the ashtray cracked through the room. Alexander pressed his lips tight, as if holding back a tidal wave. I'll handle things with Sophia. I won't let her have the baby. I'm sorry. Now that you're pregnant, I'll take care of you and the baby. His voice carried like a promise, but I could hear the despair beneath it. From beneath the sofa cushion, I drew out a file I had prepared, moving slowly, and pushed it toward him. Sign it, Alexander. Let's end this peacefully. He opened the file, his fingers halting the moment they saw the 4 words, divorce agreement. His face stiffened, his eyes glued to the page, as if trying to make sense of the simplest words. You know, I'm an orphan, I said, my finger brushing the ultrasound picture on the pregnancy report. This child is my only family. Carrying it was my way of forcing myself to end this marriage with you. I lifted my head, met his eyes, my voice firm. I don't want to lose it. Alexander looked at me, his voice raspy, choked by smoke and emotion. Violet, are you saying if I don't sign the divorce, you'll get rid of the baby? I nodded, the gesture simple but heavy. I'm carrying it, but all I can think about is your 2 years of betrayal. I have no reason to convince myself to give birth. And yet I can't bring myself to end it. I paused, letting silence underline the words. If we divorce, the baby will only be mine. And I won't have to keep asking myself, is my husband at his mistress's place again today? My eyes fell on the undone collar of his shirt, where a faint red mark glared like a stain that couldn't be erased. Like today. A man supposedly in a meeting still had time to shower. I thought then, had you just come from her place? Afraid I'd suspect, so you scrubbed every trace clean? Alexander's face grew paler by the second. His hand shot up to cover the mark on his skin, clumsy, panicked. I rose, looking down at him from above, my voice ringing clear through the stifling air. I don't want to be the kind of woman who sits home poisoned by jealousy and resentment. I want you to keep at least a decent memory of me, so I think ending it is best. The living room drowned in dead silence, broken only by Alexander's ragged, frantic breathing, like the pounding heart of someone drowning. The moonlight had shifted, now spilling directly over the divorce agreement, the black letters on white paper cutting into the eyes like knives. Finally he spoke, his voice sounding distant, weary. Give me some time to think. I turned, walking toward the bedroom. 3 days. In 3 days, I want your answer, I said, without looking back. Closing the door, I left the lights off, lay flat on the bed. In the darkness, tears streamed silently, hot against my skin. Outside came the sharp crash of glass shattering, like the splintering of a heart, followed by the thunderous slam of a door, an ending drenched in rage. I laid my hand gently over my belly, whispering into the dark. Alexander, don't blame me. You betrayed first. Between Alexander and me, it was never just a short distance. It was class. I grew up in the foster system in the slums, where even my name was something my foster mother casually picked out of an old, dust-covered book on a shelf. Alexander, on the other hand, the day he was born, Thorn Corp's stock price immediately hit the ceiling, the ringing bells on the stock exchange like a symphony of welcome. Every LED screen in the city lit up with glowing words. Congratulations to Thorn Corp on the joyous arrival of the heir. In freshman year, He chased after me with all the flashy gestures I thought were nothing more than the pastime of a bored rich boy. The designer bags he gave, I returned intact. The love letters he wrote, I never opened, just picked them up and threw them straight into the trash. I wanted no part of it. I didn't want to be a temporary toy in his glittering world. Until one stormy night, when I was on night shift at the 7-Eleven. He burst in like a drenched dog, rain dripping from his messy hair to the floor, forming small puddles that sparkled under the light. He slammed a credit card on the counter, his voice hoarse. "Buy 3 hours of your time, eat a bowl of ramen." I looked into his reddened eyes, tears mixing with rain sliding down his cheeks, and suddenly realized those born into wealth could cry too, could tremble beneath the freezing rain. Only later did I find out that day marked the 10th anniversary of his mother's death. Why me? When we were already in love, I once asked him that, while we were sitting in a Michelin restaurant in New York, the sound of knives and forks tapping porcelain ringing soft, the smell of grilled beef rich in the air. His hand froze halfway through cutting steak, and then he answered, "Because when you look at me, your eyes don't have that flattering light like everyone else's." I lowered my head, sipped red wine, hiding the bitter smile at the corner of my lips behind the rim. He would never know that the reason my eyes held no light was because I had long seen through everything. Love was nothing more than an equal trade. If I was to sell, then I might as well sell to the highest bidder, and he, with all his wealth, was the most logical choice. Alexander thought what moved me were the handwritten letters he wrote nonstop for 3 years, or the fact that he gave up a corporate marriage alliance for me, a decision that made Thorncorp's stock plunge for days. But the truth was, I had simply calculated carefully. With him, I could leave the damp basement and move into a penthouse overlooking the entire city. I could make sure kids in charity homes had new uniforms, clean clothes that smelled fresh, instead of the rags I used to wear. That night in the presidential suite, when he kissed my collarbone softly, his lips warm against my skin, I was busy counting the number of cuts on the chandelier above. When he called my name with trembling emotion, his breath hot in my ear, I was considering opening a Swiss bank account the next morning, calculating how long the balance could last. The night he proposed, standing on the deck of a yacht in the Hamptons with a diamond ring raised high, I stared at his shaking hand and thought, this hand had signed contracts worth fortunes. How many children's charities could it rebuild? The media blasted news of us as a power couple on Forbes and CNBC, camera flashes bursting endlessly like a modern fairy tale. Only I knew I was nothing more than a clever merchant, turning marriage into a long-term investment. The night before the wedding, Mrs. Harper wept, afraid I'd be hurt, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. I smiled as I wiped them away, thinking, how could I be hurt? I wasn't even bringing my heart to the altar, only cold, sharp calculations. No matter how sincere Alexander was, it was only ever a short play before this thing called love vanished, like a contract reaching its expiry. In the first year of marriage, I learned to distinguish the origins and vintages of caviar. In the second, I earned my MBA from Harvard Business School, the applause echoing at graduation, the heavy certificate in my hands. By the spring of the third year, I found traces of pale pink lipstick on his shirt collar, a shade I never wore, a faint, unfamiliar fragrance lingering. When I reapplied my lipstick in the bathroom mirror, my lips trembled under the gloss, and I realized the woman in the reflection was shaking, tears streaming hot and salty. Someone as calculating as me, yet crying for a man, muffled sobs echoing in the cold marble bathroom. That day, I dried my tears, fixed my makeup, changed into the most expensive business suit, the silk hugging my body. When the car stopped under the company building, I looked up at the tower I had saved for, the glass reflecting blinding sunlight, but I refused to shed another tear. "Good morning, Director Clark." James at reception greeted respectfully, polite voice, bowing slightly. I smiled and nodded, stepping into the private elevator in my custom-made heels. Soon after, I signed a 9-figure contract under the name Mrs. Thorne. For the past 2 years, I had been gentle, understanding, giving him emotional value, warm hugs, sweet whispers in his ear. And for 2 years, my business map no longer needed the glow of Thorne Corp. Each step steady, each contract accumulated. When I myself had become a power couple, those degrading plays of bowing my head could finally close. To say I waited for him to come back is a lie. I only wanted him to feel more guilt, so I could gain more and more, piece by piece, like the rising numbers on a balance sheet. You see, even divorce, I calculated every step, every smallest detail, to ensure the highest return for myself. I once thought Alexander had stopped loving me, so breaking up would be easy, like a contract reaching its expiration. Sign, and each of us goes our separate way. But 3 days passed. Alexander didn't come home. No familiar footsteps on the wooden floor, and my phone stayed silent. No message, no call. The dark screen reflected my tired face, and I wondered if he was laughing with someone else or simply hiding from the truth. I called his special assistant, Mr. Jenkins. The ringing dragged on like a tense waiting melody before it was finally picked up. His voice came through, polite but rushed. "Mrs. Thorne, the CEO is in a board meeting. As soon as it ends, I'll immediately pass on your message for him to call you back." I hung up, buried my head in work, trying to bury the gnawing worry inside. Looking up, it was already 3 in the afternoon, my neck aching, the phone screen still dark. The sunlight outside the window was so bright it made me want to cry, golden rays stabbing through the glass. I put on sunglasses, drove straight to Thorne Corporation. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thorne." Every employee who passed greeted me politely, their voices even, slight bows with professional smiles. I smiled and nodded back, my perfect composure unchanged from any other day. No one knew that the Mrs. Thorne they respected was in the middle of a divorce from their CEO. I pushed open the director's office door, the handle cold in my palm. "Alex," the word Thorne hadn't even left my lips when I turned and walked out. My nails dug deep into my palms, a sharp pain flaring in my chest that I forced down like a stabbing ache spreading. At that moment, Sophia was wrapped around Alexander like a snake, her arms tight around his neck, his silk shirt unbuttoned 3 notches, revealing pale skin glinting under the afternoon sun. Alexander's face was expressionless, but his hand still rested on her waist. "Sorry to disturb you." I didn't expect my voice could still sound so calm, steady as if I were talking about the weather. Alexander shoved Sophia away, the movement rough enough to make her stumble, then lunged after me, grabbing my wrist. "Clark, listen to me first," his voice urgent. Feeling the prying eyes of staff nearby, the furtive looks, the whispers, I didn't want to make a scene. One more friend is better than one more enemy. Besides, he was still the father of the baby in my belly. "Inside the office, then talk," I said, low but firm. Sophia was still fumbling to button up, her fingers trembling. The more frantic she got, the more she failed, silk slipping from her grasp. Red marks still showed at her neck. She looked at Alexander for rescue, eyes glistening, voice shaking. "You!" But his voice cut cold. "Get out! Resign yourself! Don't let me see you again." "I'm pregnant with your child!" Sophia screamed, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands cradling her belly as if protecting a treasure. "Handle it cleanly." "Don't make me repeat myself," he said, as if discarding trash, without a flicker of hesitation. "You'll regret this." Sophia's face burned with anger, her eyes red, and she fled in panic. Only the 2 of us remained, the air stifling. Alexander rubbed his forehead, fingers pressing his temples, his voice hoarse. 2 years ago, I was deceived. She helped me." I stroked my belly. "So to avoid being deceived, you kept cheating for 2 years straight?" My voice rose, laced with sarcasm. "Clark," he reached out, his fingers trembling slightly. Whatever you want, I'll give you. Money, shares, property. I stepped back firmly, avoiding him. I don't want to be with you. Ale. The sunset outside was sinking, shining straight into his eyes. He suddenly pulled me into a tight embrace, arms locking around my waist, his hot lips brushing my ear, his voice whispering urgently. Never. I just lost my head. That baby, I won't let her have it. I'll cut her off, we'll start again. I cut him off. Do you know, a pregnant woman's unstable emotions affect the baby's development. I don't want my child to suffer any negative impact. If you ever loved me, then let me go. Leaving Alexander's office, I immediately ran into Sophia, who had been waiting all along. What are you so smug about? She blocked my way, her eyes gleaming with arrogance. Alexander only acted harsh toward me just now to put on a show for you. He'd never really fire me. I didn't bother to glance at her, just quietly stepped aside and kept walking. Her overwhelming perfume stung my nose, giving me a headache. Sophia lowered her voice, almost a whisper, but full of provocation. He said he loves me. She paused, then added, he told me he's long been disgusted with you. I stopped in my tracks. Slowly, I turned my head, my eyes locking on hers, not a flicker of emotion. Sophia immediately caressed her belly in a deliberate gesture, the corner of her lips curling. He also said, he can't wait for our baby to be born. Unlike you. Her words were an arrow aimed straight at my heart, but I only smiled. A light, icy smile. I wish you a sweet little boy soon, and everything you desire. Sophia's face cracked, her eyes showing her fury. Violet Clark, how can you be so pathetic? She nearly screamed. Didn't you see the photos? Your husband hasn't loved you in a long time. To watch him in bed with another woman and still endure it. You've got no self-respect left, do you? Every word was like a needle, but I only sneered, lips curling with contempt. Sophia. Mistresses who dare flaunt themselves in front of the legal wife rarely end well. Her face went pale. I elegantly pressed the elevator button. The doors slid shut, and through the narrow gap, I could still hear her muttered curses, trembling with rage. Sitting in the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, I watched the neon lights streak past the window, red and green blurs like a moving painting. Suddenly, I found it absurd. The girl who once worked night shifts at a 7-Eleven. Who could have imagined she'd one day be bothered by things like this? I thought back, ironically, to when Alexander chased after me, looking like some foolish romantic. I remembered that snowy night, the heir of the Thorne family, standing in line in the freezing cold outside my school gate just to eat a bowl of street ramen with me. He was shivering uncontrollably, but still grinning awkwardly, pressing the only hot cup of milk into my hand. Clark, I'll treat you well for the rest of my life, he said with certainty. But he didn't say, I'll treat only you well. So the fact he stopped loving me was inevitable. In their glittering world, Alexander was still considered the model husband. At least he remembered to play his role at home, remembered to post anniversary stories on the right day. On Valentine's Day, there were roses. On birthdays, a Cartier necklace. On anniversaries, he would cancel every meeting to take me on an island getaway. Other wealthy wives, at cocktail parties, would always feign admiration. Violet, you're so lucky to have Alexander. And I always played along, smiling shyly, lips curved perfectly. Yes, every day I thank God. But no one knew my college dream was simply to marry an ordinary office worker, squeeze into the subway every morning, spend weekends curled up in a tiny rented room, watching movies, the sound of popcorn crackling in the microwave. It was Alexander who led me into the dazzling world of parties and million-dollar contracts. And it was also him who made me change my original dream from something simple to cold, sharp calculations. The day I discovered his affair, I actually felt relieved, as though some invisible burden had finally been lifted. So it's finally here, I thought, standing before the mirror, tears streaming down my face, but only for a single minute. After that, I wiped them away, fixed my makeup, and went on to sign a 9-figure contract. After all, love can betray, but a bank account never will. When the Rolls-Royce glided smoothly into the Villa district, my phone buzzed. I unlocked the screen, a message from an unknown number. A photo. Alexander holding Sophia, her face buried against his chest, tears glistening on her cheeks, while his hand gently patted her back. A tender gesture of comfort. I let out a small laugh. Alexander had always been good at hiding, like a seasoned actor on the stage of life. Just because of one faint trace of pink lipstick on a shirt collar, I had an investigation running for a whole month, yet nothing turned up. But in the end, all his efforts couldn't withstand Sophia's eagerness, the mistress desperate to replace me, step by step, photo by photo. For the past 2 years, this phone number had sent me over 100 intimate pictures, from secret moments in hotels to stolen snapshots in his office. Nothing was missing, no trick left unused. And of course, what kind of mistress doesn't dream of turning into the wife? Otherwise, what's the point of being a mistress at all? Every photo was a dagger she threw at me, hoping I'd crumble, hoping I'd hand over the throne. I could have easily used those photos to force Alexander into divorce. But then I thought again. The villa I lived in, the luxury car I drove, the status that made everyone bow in respect. Weren't all of those thanks to him? A person cannot be too ungrateful. But if he insisted on clinging, if he thought I'd remain forever the obedient cat curled in his lap, then he was wrong. I was never a tame pet. My claws were still razor sharp. Alexander pushed the door open. I was leaning against the window, gazing at the night view. He was still immaculate in his suit, but in his hand was a plastic bag from 7-Eleven, inside 2 familiar packs of ramen. "Clark, I'm home," his voice soft, as he casually tossed my phone into the fish tank. Bubbles gurgled upward. Next went the tablet, then the laptop, each device sinking to the bottom one by one. I quietly watched the ripples spread across the water's surface, a chill seeping into my chest. "Are you planning to lock me in?" I asked. He calmly loosened his tie, his movements slow, his eyes so gentle it was terrifying, like a perfect mask. "I just don't want irrelevant people or things disturbing us anymore." The next morning, sunlight pierced through the sheer curtains into the kitchen. Alexander wore an apron, cooking ramen. The exact ramen I once treated him to at 7-Eleven years ago. "Taste it." He brought it over like a trophy, the steaming bowl, his eyes full of hope, sparkling in the sunlight. I took it, the metal spoon touching my lips, eating small bites, noodles too soft, broth too little, overly salty. Yet my eyes burned, a single restrained tear sliding down my cheek. He watched me finish every strand, his face carrying the familiar smile of long ago. On the third day, I don't know where he found an old bicycle. The back seat was padded with his suit jacket, silk smooth yet digging painfully. He pedaled slowly, the breeze brushing my hair, careful not to jolt me, the bike bell chiming softly. "Hold me tight," he said while pedaling, his voice brimming with joy, as if reliving a memory. I wrapped my arms around his waist, rested my face against his back, the white shirt carrying a trace of sun, but it was no longer the same as before. On the fourth night, a projector was set up in the living room. He dug out an old movie we had watched dozens of times, the image blurry, flickering. Halfway through, I fell asleep on his shoulder, just like before. Half dreaming, I felt him gently carry me into the bedroom, pressing a light kiss on my forehead. On the 5th day, the garden glowed with scented candles. He held a dusty old guitar, strumming the song from our first date. Off-key many times, yet it drew me deep into the music. On the 6th day, the sweet smell of chocolate filled the kitchen. He fumbled, trying again to make the handmade chocolates from his confession day. Though melted and shapeless, I still ate every piece right in front of him. Late on the 7th night, passing the study, I heard muffled arguing. Through the crack in the door, I saw him shouting furiously into the computer. Get rid of it! Whatever it costs. On the screen, Sophia was crying. I quietly stepped back, my footsteps soft on the carpet, returned to the bedroom, opened the vanity drawer, and took out the divorce papers I had prepared. This 7-day love game had come to its end. Alexander walked in, the door opening softly, his face paling at the sight of the document, then tearing it to shreds without hesitation. Violet, don't you dare divorce me. I worked so hard to have you. I will never let you go. His voice rang out, desperate. I spoke, my tone calm but firm. Alexander, one day you will have to. He roared, his voice breaking apart. No! Never. His words carried a fury I had never seen, like a raging storm. In this lifetime, I will never divorce you. Alexander said he had worked so hard to marry me, and that wasn't a lie. It was a reminder of the crazy days he once went through. That winter, snow falling thick and white, he was cut off from financial support and thrown out of the house because he wanted to marry me. He had to take part-time jobs to prove his love, his hands trembling as he carried trays of food, the smell of grease clinging to his clothes, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing cold. He endured for 3 months, waking early every morning to shovel snow in front of the store, his expensive leather shoes now stained with mud. Even Mr. Thorne grew so furious he smashed 3 of his favorite cups, his face red as he shouted, "You fool! You're destroying the future of this family!" But Alexander only lowered his head. He starved, he froze. Meals were just dry sandwiches swallowed in haste. Then he collapsed and ended up in the hospital. I can't help but find it ironic. What began as a marriage forced into a dead end eventually became the Thorne family's most successful PR case. Financial papers praised him as the love-struck heir, sending Thorne Corp's stock soaring. Entertainment magazines glorified the story of the poor girl and the tech startup CEO. Even the wedding bouquet at our ceremony pushed the stock up 2 points. Later, Grandfather Thorne once called me into his study, sitting behind the old wooden desk, his voice heavy as he asked, "Do you really believe that a poor girl and a wealthy heir can live happily together?" His wooden cane tapped the latest financial report. "Child, don't be so naive," he said, his voice hoarse and seasoned with experience. I lowered my head, set the cup of hot coffee before him, the bitter aroma filling the heavy air, my hand steady, not a tremor. "Mr. Thorne, I have never been naive." At 3 in the morning, Alexander's phone suddenly lit up, the cold blue glow slicing through the stillness. "Director Thorne, the photos of you and Miss Lynn, they're already trending." On the other end, Mr. Jenkins' cautious, restrained voice came through the speaker, heavy with worry. Alexander shot up from the bed, silk blanket slipping onto the floor. He turned to look at me, the moonlight striking sharply across the tense line of his jaw. I pretended to shift in my sleep, staying quiet and still. He walked out barefoot, gently closing the door behind him. I heard him, his anger barely restrained, his voice a low growl seeping through the crack. "Whatever it takes, clean it up before morning." Mr. Jenkins faltered, his voice trembling through the door. "Sir, but the photos are spreading too fast. The hashtag already." Hearing that echo, I let out a small sigh, pulled the blanket higher, trying to sleep again. But inside me rose an unnamed ache, like an undertow, heavy and unyielding, tightening my chest. That morning, Thorne Corp's official account released a statement. Recently, false information has been circulating online about CEO Alexander and Ms. Sophia. Upon verification, these were maliciously doctored images. The company would sue anyone spreading them. The language, cold, official. Attached was a scanned document stamped in glaring red ink, the seal glowing under digital light, along with an expert report confirming the image manipulation. The comments section was set to restricted, only showing posts from verified accounts. The corporation's official website updated simultaneously, placing the statement in a prominent frame at the top. Less than an hour after the post, the hashtag #ThornAffair had already climbed to trending. Yet the photos released, images of the two embracing and kissing on a private yacht, were sharp down to the smallest detail. Even the limited edition Patek Philippe watch on Alexander's wrist was unmistakably clear. One side issued denials, the other kept revealing truth. Would Thorn Corp really dare to sue? I thought not, because it was real, and under the scrutiny of the public's magnifying glass, every detail would be torn apart. I walked barefoot across the Persian rug, the soft fibers brushing my cold soles, and saw Alexander hunched on the sofa, his tall frame now shrunken, curled under the dim moonlight, his breathing heavy. His phone screen still glowed, a new message from Sophia. "Alex, they're cursing me everywhere." The lock screen wallpaper remained our wedding photo taken in the Maldives. I pulled a thin blanket over him, looking closely at his face. Still handsome, still composed, but no longer the young man he once was. Early the next morning, the front of Thorn Corp's building was packed tight, without a single gap. The roar of the crowd rising like a storm. Reporters raising cameras high above their heads, flashes bursting like lightning, microphones thrust forward like hungry hands. The media was waiting for an explanation from Thorn Corporation. After all, the wedding that year between Alexander and me had once been described as the most luxurious of the year. The love story between the poor girl and the tech startup CEO, once admired by so many, had now become a feast for the public. The newspapers that once sent congratulations were now nothing more than vultures catching the scent of rot, waiting to pick apart a bloody banquet. Thorn Corp's stock had gone straight into a trading halt as soon as the market opened. But Alexander still ignored it all, still continued playing the game of healing love. With me. For 3 days straight, strangers kept leaking rumors. Even the schedules of his meetings with Sophia were exposed, detailed down to minutes and seconds. His face grew more haggard with each passing day. On the morning of the 4th day, shareholders gathered at the gates of the villa. I stood on the spiral staircase, the polished wood railing cold beneath my palm, watching Alexander frozen before the floor-to-ceiling window, the pale morning light falling across his face. The ashtray was overflowing with cigarette butts, smoke still hanging in the stifling air, and in that light his back seemed to have aged 10 years. His shoulders slumped in exhaustion. "Do you really have to divorce me?" He turned, his eyes stopping at my belly, beginning to show, his voice hoarse, unbearably weary. "Yes," I answered softly, and seeing his gaunt face, my chest felt heavy, like a stone pressing down. Alexander stubbed out his cigarette. "If this is what you want, I agree. I'll have the lawyers draft the divorce agreement." Alex held a press conference. Reporters jostled, throwing sharp questions, microphones raised. "CEO Thorn, the intimate photos of you and Miss Sophia have spread across the internet. Did you cheat during your marriage?" Another shouted, "CEO Clark, what do you think of your husband's betrayal?" And, "Have you two been separated?" I gently laid my hand on Alexander's clenched arm, my fingers tapping lightly 3 times on his shirt button, the signal between us. "Let me handle it." Waiting until the room calmed slightly, whispers fading, I gracefully took the microphone. "First, thank you for your concern." My voice as steady as every other time I had faced the media. "Alexander Thorn and I signed a divorce agreement 2 years ago, but for the sake of business partnerships and shareholder interests, we did not make it public." The hall erupted instantly, like a nest of bees, reporters furiously typing, certain this news would sweep the entire internet within a minute. From the corner of my eye, I saw Alexander's hand clench white-knuckled at his side, his eyes flashing with anger. At some point, Sophia had pushed her way to the front, dressed in a flowing white dress, looking like a fragile little flower, hair loose, eyes glistening. For a moment, there was triumph in her gaze before it shifted into a near-crying look. She quickly stepped forward, slipping her arm through Alexander's, the gesture intimate. "Thank you, Clark. Truly, Alex and I are both grateful to you," she emphasized deliberately, her voice sweet but laced with provocation. "After all, Love cannot be forced, right, Clark? I looked at her act, the corner of my lips curving into a perfect smile. The relationship between Thorne and Ms. Lynn indeed began after our divorce. Though separated, the cooperation between Thorne Corp and Clark Corp will not be affected. I paused, my gaze sweeping the room, flashes blinding. After all, business is business. Love is love. Sophia's eyes reddened, acting like the heroine of a drama, turning to the cameras, tears glimmering. Actually, I've always admired Clark. It's just love. She trailed off, leaving room for the media to speculate wildly. I sneered inwardly. Idiot. Alexander's expression turned terrifyingly dark, and he yanked his hand away from her, the motion rough. As CEO Clark just said, between us, there remains mutual respect. Even after divorce, we are still good business partners. After the press conference ended and the noise ebbed, Alexander was pulled away by Mr. Jenkins, his hurried whisper urgent. Mr. Thorne, the shareholders are waiting. Sophia blocked me backstage, tear streaks still on her face, but her voice brimming with challenge, her eyes flashing. Clark, since you're divorced, don't ever show up in front of Alex again. I calmly set my purse on the dressing table, leisurely touched up. My lipstick. You know better than anyone what the truth is. I turned to face her. Even though I'm divorced from Alex, I have no reason to avoid him. After all, the joint project between Thorne Corp and Clark Corp is worth $2.7 billion. If I don't meet him, are you the one who will sign the contract? Sophia's face froze, her lips pressed tight. I continued, my voice gentle. Besides, I brushed my hand lightly over my still flat belly, the gesture tender yet deliberate. Alex is still the father of the baby in my stomach. I might not need to see him, but the child cannot live without its father, don't you think? Her expression hardened instantly. You! That's impossible! I calmly picked up my handbag, the zipper clicking softly. Congratulations on becoming Mrs. Thorne. Stepping out of the lounge, I took a deep breath. The cold air from the basement parking lot rose against my face, carrying dampness and the smell of plastic. My flat shoes struck the ground, footsteps echoing in the empty space. Why did you say that? Alexander suddenly rushed out, grabbing my wrist. His voice was hoarse, his eyes filled with emotions I couldn't begin to read. I gently pulled my hand back. The original script had already been written. I would smile politely. Say that the photos were nothing more than cheap Photoshop fabrications. Say that it was all just a ridiculous misunderstanding. Then quietly sign the divorce agreement in a place no one knew. But in the end, I had torn that script apart with my own hands. The reporters aren't stupid. You and Sophia were really together. This can't withstand close scrutiny. Anyway, the stock price has already stabilized. The result is the same. It doesn't matter. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple rising and falling. You know very well Sophia and I were only... He tried to speak, his voice breaking, but I cut him off, my tone soft yet sharp. She's a mistress, not love. The smile stayed on my lips, but my eyes were frozen cold. In this world, who doesn't have one? Mr. Thorne, no need to explain, I understand. I saw the struggle in his eyes. Without another word, I turned, stepped into the car, shutting myself away from his gaze. Sitting inside, I suddenly remembered the first party I had ever attended. The wives spoke about their husbands' mistresses with a casual indifference, as if talking about the weather, their fingers tracing the rim of wine glasses, bright red lipstick leaving marks on crystal. The shock and confusion I felt back then had now dissolved into the bitter curve of a smile at my lips. I once thought I could learn to accept it, like the other wealthy wives, smiling at the whispers of affairs, nodding politely at false blessings. But in the end, I couldn't. Just the thought of Alexander entangled with another woman made my chest tighten, the pain so sharp my body trembled. Luckily, after 2 years of endurance, Clark Corp no longer needed to rely on Thorne Corp. Nights spent alone revising every line of a business plan. Parties where I bore the title Mrs. Thorne. The perfect smile masking a frozen heart, all to secure opportunities. Each handshake, each signature on a contract. All of it finally bought me the strength to withdraw intact, like a warrior leaving the battlefield with her sword still sharp. The stock price of Thorncorp finally stabilized again. Sophia's so-called public debut was splashed across the media for days. The public clearly didn't fully believe that Alexander and I had been divorced for 2 years. Financial outlets were analyzing the stock fluctuations, while the entertainment side kept speculating nonstop. The so-called divorced 2 years ago, to them, was nothing more than a PR move to cover up Alexander's affair. If Sophia had been a little smarter, she should have chosen silence. But instead, she deliberately picked the press conference to put on a ridiculous act. Within minutes, keywords like Mistress, the Mistress's replacement plan, covered the entire internet. The hashtag Sophia the Mistress climbing to the top of trending. Audiences even dug up old photos of her from her days frequenting bars and different drinking parties, the same white dresses over and over. Her social media collapsed completely, flooded with insults, and Alexander's image also backfired, from the devoted heir now turned into the charming betrayer. On the day of signing the divorce agreement, sunlight poured through the large glass windows of the law office, casting a soft golden glow across my rounded belly, the silk fabric of my dress gently wrapping around my body. The terms Alexander offered were even more generous than I had imagined. He left all fixed assets under his name to me, from the penthouse apartment to the seaside villa, each signature like a cut of the blade. He even committed that, after the baby was born, 15% of Thorncorp shares would be transferred under the child's name, a number that made the lawyer pause, glancing at me in astonishment. When the lawyer read out the final clause, his voice steady, my fingertips unconsciously traced the edge of the paper. The stack of documents was 3 times thicker than the divorce contract I had once drafted for him. Even the villa we were living in, he left to me. I looked up at the star-shaped lamp in the master bedroom, the one he had installed with his own hands. And suddenly I realized, this man had once truly loved me. I had never believed in the story of a poor girl living happily ever after, with a tech CEO. And reality proved me right. 5 years of marriage, I never once hoped to be loved completely, only learned to make use of the small scraps of affection to step across the class divide. I packed all of his belongings, asked the assistant to send them to his new villa that same day. But that afternoon, Mr. Jenkins showed up at my door with an entire fleet of cars. The cars were filled with baby supplies, German-made insulated bottles, premium cotton swaddles ordered from Switzerland, everything complete. Mr. Jenkins handed me a confirmation sheet, stammering, "Mr. Thorne said, if you don't like these models—" "Thank him," I said firmly as I signed. I suddenly remembered the year we first married, when he taught me how to sign a contract, his hand guiding mine, warmth passing through my skin. "The stroke must be decisive," he said, his voice steady. But now my signature could cut straight through the paper. After the divorce, I became a new legend in the business world. The society wives who once looked down on me for coming from the slums now competed to invite me to charity galas. Thorncorp ceded cooperation at a 20% discount, doubling my company's value in 3 months. On the day I signed my first international contract, I sent a large donation to every children's charity in the city. In the 8th month of my pregnancy, I still attended the technology conference. Under the crystal chandelier, I steadied my belly, raising my glass calmly. As I gently swirled the pomegranate juice, smiling as I turned, I suddenly caught a deep gaze. Alexander stood 3 steps away. The dark blue tie, knotted in a Windsor under his throat, was the very birthday gift I'd given him last year. His eyes moved from my rounded belly to my face. His Adam's apple shifted. In the end, he only raised his glass in silence. When a waiter accidentally bumped into me, the one who rushed over faster than the bodyguards was him. A warm hand steadied my elbow. On his ring finger, still the wedding ring from years ago. "Careful," he said. It was the first thing we'd said to each other after the divorce. I had told Sophia that Alexander and I would keep in touch, but in reality, I avoided seeing him as much as possible. Anything that needed handling was done by my assistant. I smiled my thanks, turned away from Alexander, and continued calmly mingling with the conference guests. When Sophia appeared, the entire hall seemed to pause for a second. She wore sharp-pointed heels, a perfectly tailored red dress, lips a blazing red, her gaze like a blade stabbing toward me. "Long time no see, Clark." She smiled brightly, but her voice was ice-cold. Pregnant and still so energetic. Truly admirable. I glanced at her flat stomach, the corner of my mouth lifting. On the day I received the divorce papers, I had opened the chat with the unknown number in front of Alexander, deleting every ambiguous photo right before his eyes. The effect was clear. All his assets could only be left to the baby in my belly. I lightly swirled the pomegranate juice in my hand, smiling as I said, "Ms. Lynn, you're too polite." She suddenly stepped closer, warning me. "But there are some things, if they're not yours, don't dream of keeping them." Around us grew quiet. All the vague or furtive eyes turned our way. Though the press conference had taken place, it was only to calm public opinion outside. Inside the circle, who didn't know exactly what the three of us were? I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion. "What do you mean by that, Ms. Lynn?" She gave a cold laugh, deliberately raising her voice. "Alexander's company gave you a 20% discount. Sends baby supplies and nutritional food every month, even every time you go for a check." She paused, her red lips curling into a mocking smile. "He's been waiting in the hospital hallway until it's over." The entire hall fell silent. I gently stroked my belly, lifting my eyes to meet hers. "So what?" "So what?" She seemed provoked by my calm, her voice suddenly sharp as a knife. "You know everything, yet you still don't stop it. You happily accept, divorce, and still cling to him." I let out a soft laugh. My pregnant belly made my movements slower, but it didn't affect the air of authority I carried now. "Ms. Lynn, Alexander didn't marry you because he never loved you." Her expression froze. I slowly adjusted my shawl. "How long have you been with him?" "Why hasn't he married you?" Her hands clenched tight, her carefully made-up face twisted with anger. "You think you've won? He only pities you. You're just relying on that baby in your belly. Who even knows if that child is his?" Her crazed eyes made me instinctively place a hand on my belly to protect it, the reflex of a mother, my heart skipping a beat. Sophia now looked on the verge of madness. I sensed she might rush at me at any moment. I narrowed my eyes, scanning around, calculating how to defend myself if needed. "Sophia!" A deep, cold male voice sounded behind her. "Alexander." No one knew how long he had been standing there. I exhaled, my shoulders loosening a little. Thank God, he was here. Sophia whipped around, the malice on her face instantly replaced by pitifulness, her voice breaking. "A thorn, But he cut her off, his voice icy. "Who allowed you to show up here?" Leave his tone was light, but enough to make her blanch, her lips trembling. "You really can't see me?" Alexander emphasized each word, his low voice sharp. "Get out!" Mr. Jenkins immediately stepped forward, polite yet firm, as he escorted her away. The entire hall was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Alexander's eyes fell on me. At last he simply said, "I'll take you home." I smiled, shook my head lightly. As I turned to walk away, his voice came from behind me, full of hope. "When you give birth, may I come?" "Yes." I didn't look back. The baby was also his child, and he had always known how to protect what was his. I didn't see the bright light in his eyes at that moment. I only knew I was about to reach my goal. The next morning, my assistant reported that Sophia had been moved elsewhere. I curved my lips in a slight smile. Lingering ties, tangled emotions. This is how they must be cut. The day I gave birth, when the nurse carried out the two newborns crying, their tiny voices echoing through the stark white hospital hallway. The man who once dominated the business world with million-dollar handshakes broke down in tears. His hands trembled as he received the babies. Lying on the delivery bed, I looked at him, suddenly remembering that snowy night 5 years ago when he was cut off and thrown out, kneeling and begging Grandfather Thorne to let him marry me. His tears then had burned just the same. "Do a DNA test," I whispered hoarsely as the anesthesia wore off, my voice weak but firm. He shook his head, his fingertips gently wiping the corners of my eyes, warm and tender. "I trust you." But I still had my assistant send samples for testing. These children were not the result of our final time together, but from years before, when we loved each other most, when he had frozen his sperm. As his legal wife, I had the right to use it through IVF. When the report came back, Alexander immediately split the 15% of shares under the names of both children. Even Grandfather Thorne, who once said I was unworthy, sent gifts. A check with so many zeros it stunned me. "You truly surprise me," he muttered, before leaving, his eyes glancing at the crib where the twins slept peacefully. I simply looked at them calmly, smiling softly. Both children were mine, tiny lives carrying warmth and hope, and after divorce, I could still give them so much more, from sunlit mansions to the opportunities I never had. After the birth, my relationship with Alexander seemed to soften slightly. He began visiting the villa often, bringing small gifts for the children. Sometimes he would just sit quietly by the crib, watching them sleep, gentle and contemplative. Every trace of Sophia seemed erased. No one mentioned her anymore. Her name vanished from every conversation. When the twins turned 3, their laughter rang out across the garden, Alexander sitting on the grass watching them play, then lifting his head, his voice hoarse. "Violet Clark, let's remarry." I shook my head, my hand brushing through a child's golden curls, sunlight glinting on them. "I think we're fine just as we are." My voice light, like a breeze drifting across the garden. I stood, walking into the house, sunlight streaming through the open windows, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from the lawn. I brewed a cup of tea, gazing through the window at Alexander bending to play with the children, their laughter mingling with birdsong. This is freedom. This is my life. I had walked through storms to find peace within myself, and from that moment, I knew life would always be worth living, because I had learned to love myself first,